The year was 1881, and the Colorado mountains stood tall and white, covered in a deep blanket of snow. Winter held the land in its icy grip, making the air sharp and cold. High up in these silent peaks lived Nathaniel Briggs. His small log cabin, nestled among the tall pine trees, was a lonely place. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a thin gray line against the vast sky. Nathaniel was a mountain man through and through. His face was weathered from sun and wind, and his hands were rough from years of chopping wood and trapping. He lived a quiet life, often speaking only to his dog, Old Bear, or the squirrels that chattered outside his window. He liked his solitude, but lately a different kind of quiet had settled in his cabin, a quiet that felt empty. He was tired of cooking his own meager meals and seeing dust gather in the corners. He needed help. Not a friend, certainly not a wife, but someone practical, someone to keep the cabin tidy, to bake bread, and to mend his worn shirts. He had heard about agencies that could send such a person, even out to the remote mountains. So after much thought, he had sent a letter down to the distant town, along with a good amount of money. He asked for a sturdy, sensible woman, someone who understood hard work and wouldn't mind the quiet life. He pictured a woman with strong hands and a serious face, someone who would keep to herself and simply do the work. He waited for weeks, the snow falling steadily, burying the world deeper and deeper. Each day he would look out, expecting to see a figure trudging through the drifts. He imagined the smell of fresh-baked bread filling his cabin, the organized neatness that would replace his bachelor clutter. He thought of warm stew waiting for him after a long day of checking traps. He believed he had made a clear request for a helper, a domestic companion, nothing more. He was prepared for a new routine, a more comfortable solitude, but he was certainly not prepared for what the next sleigh would bring. The day finally came when a sleigh, pulled by two tired horses, crunched through the snow and stopped outside Nathaniel's cabin. He stepped out, Old Bear at his heels, ready to greet the sensible helper he had paid for. But the woman who climbed slowly from the sleigh was not what he expected at all. She was small and looked very tired. Her clothes were thin and worn, not fit for the harsh mountain winter. What surprised Nathaniel most was the clear roundness of her belly. She was very pregnant. Her eyes, wide and a little scared, met his. "Are you Mr. Briggs?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Anna." Nathaniel just stared. This was not the sturdy, practical woman he had asked for. This was a young, pregnant widow, clearly with nothing left in the world but the clothes on her back and the life growing inside her. The agency had sent him a surprise, a burden he hadn't asked for. His brow furrowed and a deep frown settled on his face. He felt a surge of anger, a hot wave in the cold air. This was wrong. This wasn't the arrangement. Anna seemed to shrink under his hard gaze. She hugged her thin shawl tighter around herself. "They told me, they said you needed help," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I have nowhere else to go. My husband passed last summer, and I lost everything." Nathaniel could see the truth in her eyes. She was desperate, she was alone, and she was carrying a child. He wanted to tell her to go back, to demand that the agency send the right person. But as he looked at her, he saw the faint blue of her lips, the way she shivered despite her efforts to be brave. A biting wind suddenly whipped around them, bringing with it the first flakes of a new, heavy snowfall. The sky was turning a dark, angry gray. A blizzard was coming. The wind howled louder, tearing through the valley like a hungry wolf. Snow began to fall in earnest, not just flakes, but thick, swirling curtains that quickly hid the sleigh and horses from view. Nathaniel gritted his teeth. He was a man of rules and order, and this was a mess. But even he knew that sending a pregnant woman back into such a storm would be a death sentence. "Get inside," he grunted, his voice rougher than he intended. He grabbed her small, flimsy bag from the sleigh, feeling the surprising lightness of it. He led her quickly towards the cabin, the wind pushing them forward. Old Bear, sensing the urgency, nudged Anna gently towards the door. Inside, the cabin felt smaller with her presence. Nathaniel pointed to a stool by the fire. "Sit." He then went about unhitching the horses and leading them to the small linta he used for shelter, his mind still churning with resentment. This wasn't what he wanted. He had paid for a helper, a quiet worker, not someone who would need his protection and care. By the time he came back in, covered in snow, Anna was huddled by the fire, shivering despite the warmth. He poured her a cup of hot tea, setting it on the small table without a word. The blizzard raged outside, rattling the windows and piling snow against the door. They were trapped. For the next few days, the storm held them captive. The cabin became a place of tense silence. Nathaniel went about his chores, stoking the fire, melting snow for water, checking his traps nearby. Anna mostly sat by the fire, her hands resting on her swollen belly. She tried to make herself small to not be a bother. She cooked a simple meal one evening, a stew made from the meager supplies she found, and it was surprisingly good. But still, the air between them was thick with unspoken words and Nathaniel's quiet disapproval. He hadn't said she could stay forever, only that she couldn't leave in the storm. Yet with each passing hour it became clear she had nowhere else to go. The mountain had sealed them in, two strangers bound by fate and a fierce winter. The blizzard eventually eased, but the deep snow kept them isolated. Days turned into weeks, and life in the cabin settled into a strange rhythm. They spoke little, their conversations limited to needs. More wood, or is the water boiling? Yet without words, a quiet understanding began to grow. Anna, despite her condition, began to help. She swept the floor with a broom made of pine branches, sorted dried herbs, and kept the small fire burning steadily. Nathaniel, for his part, found himself watching her, noticing the way she carefully saved every scrap of food, the gentle way she hummed to herself sometimes. One afternoon, he saw her shivering a little even by the fire. Her thin shawl, her only protection against the cold, was stained and worn. Without a word, he took it from her, much to her surprise. She looked at him with wide, questioning eyes, but he simply walked to the basin, filled it with warm water, and began to carefully wash the wool. Anna watched him, her expression a mix of bewilderment and a tiny spark of something else, perhaps hope. When he handed it back, clean and almost dry, a faint blush touched her cheeks, and she offered him a small, shy smile. Another time, he noticed her struggling to bend over the basin to wash her face, her pregnant belly making it hard. The next morning, when she went to get water, she found a sturdy, three-legged stool placed right beside the washstand. It was rough-hewn, clearly made by hand, but perfect for sitting. She looked at him across the room, and this time her smile was a little wider, a little less shy. He merely grunted, pretending to be busy sharpening his axe, but he felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the fire. These small, silent gestures began to chip away at the wall between them. Nathaniel, who had guarded his heart for so long, found himself doing things he hadn't planned. He fixed a loose shutter she had pointed out, brought in softer animal furs for her to sit on, and even one evening shared a story about old Bear's younger days. Anna, in turn, started leaving him warm meals by the fire when he returned from his traps, and the cabin began to smell of fresh pine and baking, a scent he hadn't known in years. Slowly, silently, the harsh edges of their forced closeness began to soften. One cold afternoon, Nathaniel found himself staring at a piece of smooth pine wood he had saved. His eyes kept flicking to Anna, who was carefully mending one of his old shirts by the fire, her belly now very large. He thought of the coming baby, and a strange feeling, both fear and something softer, stirred in his chest. Where would the baby sleep? On a pile of furs on the floor? It didn't seem right. Without a word, he picked up the pine and his carving tools. Anna looked up, curious, as he began to work. He carved slowly, carefully, his rough hands moving with surprising gentleness. The wood chips fell to the floor like tiny snowflakes. He shaped the sides, smoothed the edges, and fitted the pieces together. Anna watched him, her needle resting in her lap, her gaze steady and soft. She didn't ask what he was making, she simply watched. Day after day, Nathaniel worked on the project. He chose the best wood, sanded it until it was smooth, and made sure it was strong. He even found some soft, clean rabbit fur to line the bottom. When he finally finished, a small, sturdy wooden cradle stood beside the fireplace. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with care, a silent promise of welcome. Anna's eyes filled with tears when she saw it. She reached out a hand, tracing the smooth wood. "Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice thick with feeling. It was the first time she had said his name with such warmth. She looked at him, and in her gaze he saw not just gratitude but a deep, quiet trust. He felt a blush creep up his neck, unused to such open emotion. He just nodded, then went back to sharpening his axe, pretending not to notice. This small cradle, carved by his own hands, was more than just a place for a baby. It was a bridge between them. Each silent gesture, the cleaned shawl, the stool, and now the cradle, built a little more trust, a little more understanding. The cabin, once filled only with his solitude, was slowly, wonderfully, becoming a place where two souls, and a soon-to-arrive third, were beginning to truly belong. The quiet between them was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken care and the gentle promise of a new future. Just as the cradle was finished, another storm swept down from the peaks, even fiercer than the first. The wind screamed like a banshee, shaking the cabin to its very foundations. Snow piled so high against the windows that the inside of the cabin grew dark, lit only by the flickering fire. It was during this wild night that Anna's labor began. Nathaniel was chopping wood outside when he heard her cry out. He rushed in to find her pale and clutching her belly, her breathing fast and shallow. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped his heart. He knew nothing about babies, nothing about women in childbirth. His world was animals, traps, and the silent wilderness. But there was no one else. The nearest town was days away, completely cut off by the raging blizzard. It's time," Anna gasped, her voice weak. She looked at him with wide, pleading eyes, trusting him completely. That trust, earned through weeks of silent gestures, pushed away his fear. He had to help her. He sprang into action. He boiled water, tearing clean cloths into strips. He remembered the few things he'd heard about births, mostly from old trappers' tales. He moved the cradle closer to the fire, warming the rabbit furs. He spoke to Anna, his voice surprisingly calm, guiding her, telling her to breathe. He wiped her brow, offered her water, and tried to be a comfort he didn't feel. Hours passed, filled with Anna's cries and Nathaniel's grim determination. He was soaked with sweat, his mind focused only on the task at hand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a tiny cry filled the cabin. A baby. A small, red, squirming baby. Nathaniel, with hands used to skinning animals, carefully cleaned the infant, wrapping it in warm cloths. He laid the tiny bundle on Anna's chest. She looked down at her baby, tears streaming down her face, a beautiful smile gracing her tired lips. "A girl," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Nathaniel looked at the new mother and child, both safe, both breathing. A warmth spread through him, different from the fire's heat, deeper than any he had known. He had saved them. In the heart of the blizzard, a new life had begun, and Nathaniel Briggs, the reclusive mountain man, had been its unlikely guardian. As the last heavy snows melted, spring began to paint the mountains with soft greens and bright wildflowers. The air grew warm, and the sound of rushing streams replaced the howl of the wind. With the arrival of spring, a new kind of warmth had also settled inside Nathaniel's cabin. The baby girl, whom Anna named Lily, was a tiny, joyful presence, filling the once silent home with coos and soft cries. Nathaniel, who had been a man of few words and solitary habits, found his life completely changed. He would spend long moments watching Lily sleep in the cradle he had made, a soft smile on his rugged face. He still went out to check his traps, but he always returned quickly, eager to see Anna and the baby. He found himself talking more, sharing stories of the forest with Anna, who listened with genuine interest. Anna, in turn, blossomed in the mountain air. She was no longer the scared, desperate widow who had arrived in the blizzard. Her cheeks were rosy, her eyes bright with a quiet happiness. She cooked, cleaned, and cared for Lily with endless love, and the cabin truly became a home under her touch. She would often catch Nathaniel's eye, and in those shared glances, a deep understanding passed between them. Their friendship, forged in the crucible of winter and childbirth, had slowly, gently turned into something more profound. It wasn't a loud or passionate love, but a quiet, steady warmth, like the embers of a long-burning fire. It was in the way Nathaniel made sure she had enough wood for the fire, in the way Anna would leave him a warm meal and a clean shirt. It was in the shared smiles over Lily's gurgles, in the comfortable silence as they sat together by the fire at night. They had faced a life-or-death situation together, and in doing so, had found a connection deeper than either had ever known. The mountain man who wanted only a helper now found his heart full, and the lonely widow found a safe harbor. They were a family unexpected and true. The snow melted, opening the mountain passes, and with them came the world outside. Nathaniel had always kept to himself, but now his trips to town for supplies were different. People noticed the subtle change in him, the softer edges, the way his eyes seemed to hold a new light. And then, word got around about Anna and the baby. Whispers started in the general store and around the saloon. "Did you hear about Briggs's cabin? A woman and a baby, they say." People wondered about Anna, a young widow appearing out of nowhere with a child. They talked about Nathaniel, the solitary mountain man, now living with a family he hadn't married into. Some were curious, some were suspicious, and some simply liked to gossip. Soon, the whispers turned into more direct questions. A few brave souls, or perhaps just nosy ones, made the trek up to Nathaniel's cabin. They were usually met by his silent, steady gaze and old bear's low growl, but they saw Anna holding Lily looking happy and healthy. They saw the neatness of the cabin, the fresh scent of baking bread. Still, the questions lingered. How did she get there? Who was the father of the child? Why hadn't they married? Then came the official visit. A man from the county office, a stern-faced fellow named Mr. Henderson, arrived on horseback, his uniform crisp even after the long ride. He had heard the rumors and was there to investigate the welfare of the child and the situation. Nathaniel stood firm, his arms subtly moving to shield Anna and Lily, who stood behind him. "This is my home," he stated, his voice low and steady, "and this is my family." Mr. Henderson looked from Nathaniel to Anna, then to the baby in her arms. He asked Anna questions about her past, her husband, how she came to be here. Anna, though nervous, answered truthfully, her voice clear. Nathaniel watched her, a fierce protectiveness rising in him. He realized more deeply than ever that this family, this life they had built, was precious. It was worth fighting for, worth defending against the prying eyes and wagging tongues of the outside world. The challenge was not just to survive the mountain, but to protect their fragile, growing love from the judgment of others. The visit from Mr. Henderson had been a stark reminder that their quiet world was not entirely